Okay, Dr. Kinsey, we'll move on from that for just a second. You were here yesterday, correct?
I was.
Did you have the opportunity to observe, I want to say his name correctly, I believe it was Tim Pombach?
I did.
He was a crime scene investigator who was qualified as an expert for the defense. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I would, he came up with two significant conclusions, you could say three, about how Paul was shot at the feed room. Do you remember what those were for this jury?
The big one that I recall is that Paul was shot in the back of the head with a contact wound. And the other one, the strikes in my mind, I don't know, the shooter passed him and shot him from inside the feed room. Those are the two big ones that I recall.
There was another one regarding the number of people there. Was there?
The thing about two shooters, yes, sir.
Okay. We'll get to that in a minute. I would like to... Doug, can you get the Elmo up? I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 182. Wait, what's that a picture of?
That's a picture of that expert with his hands cupped opposite the hinges on the door frame.
Okay. I want to leave this picture up for a moment because what is the direction that the picture was taken from?
From inside the feed room.
Facing what direction?
Outside the feed room.
Okay. Now, you had an opportunity to hear the defense's theory on how Paul was shot, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
I would like to demonstrate that with you right now.
Yes, sir.
Can you walk us through the defense's theory as you understood it to be?
Yes, sir, I can.
Your Honor, for purposes of this demonstration, I don't know if the court would allow it, but it'd be nice if we could open this door. I want to make sure that there's security here, but if we could have that door open just for a minute or two.
Can you open that door? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm grabbing what Smart states Exhibit 4, which is a camo Benelli Super Black Eagle 3 shotgun 12 gauge. We'll use this for the demonstration, so step down. Now, is this door the same width as the feed room door?
It's a couple inches wider than the feed room door.
And of course, the feed room door doesn't have this, it's inset, correct?
That is correct.
So this is not exactly a replication of what happened at the feed room door, correct?
No, sir, it's not. The door swings the same direction, though.
Now, you have given me permission. I'm very careful about muzzle velocity. Muzzle awareness. But you have given me permission to point this at you, correct?
I have.
Okay. You actually asked me to, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. So go in there and stand a couple of feet back. It doesn't have to be 5 feet. But you have since testified that Paul was 5 feet inside the feed room, correct?
Can we demonstrate the first shot out here?
I am.
I believe they...
All right, stand back a little bit because you got to stumble toward me.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to point like I'm pointing at you.
Yes, sir.
Paul is shot. Where's the shooter approximately outside the door?
The reach face or the ejection port of the shotgun is just past the door frame.
Okay, Paul has just been shot.
Yes, sir.
And in the defense's theory, you tell me what to do, and you act this out, and I'm going to do what you tell me to do based on the defense's theory of the case.
The defense agreed with the assessment that Paul stood there for a moment, bleeding down his injured left arm, and he slowly walked toward the door.
Okay, and what does the shooter do?
The shooter's coming in the door.
And then what does the shooter do?
He shoots Paul in the back of the head after he passes him.
Okay, and then shoots Paul in the back of the head like this, and where does the blood spatter go?
The blood spatter, the pellet defects, and one that I didn't know about that the expert collected was in the door frame at the top of the door.
Now, I understand this is a little different than the feed room door. That's the best we can do. So what did you find odd about the theory, first of all?
I think the theory is preposterous, in my opinion.
Can you walk me through why you think it's preposterous?
Absolutely. Number one, that dry lock number 2 shot shell fires a projectile at 1,450 feet per second once it leaves the muzzle of that weapon. As was mentioned, that's a millisecond. That's fast. To think that the pressure from flesh and bone will cause that pellet, those steel pellets now, we're not talking about lead. Lead's a little bit more giving. Lead is malleable. It will crush or flatten. We're talking about steel, BB pellets. They will turn around because of the pressure, go back the opposite direction, 180-degree direction at enough velocity to dent a steel exterior door and embed in the door frame. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen, in my opinion.
I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, but can you talk about, make sure I get it right.
And can I add?
Please do.
Also, there's no defects to the OSB or the T111 siding in the bottom of the room.
All right, wait a second. You said a lot right there.
Yes, sir.
TS what?
TS111. It's like a exterior paneling that people put on their buildings. That's what's on the building.
For all us city boys, we appreciate you describing that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. It's a whole weather paneling. There's no defects at the bottom, and if that theory is correct, if this is an entrance and this is an exit, the shot still had to go somewhere. There's no defects down there on anything. The door frame, as I mentioned in my previous testimony, the door frame has a clean void. That would be perfectly in line with those shot from that shot shell. There's no cracks, chips, pellet holes in the cement. There's nothing in the OSB. That's cheap plywood. That's man-made plywood. There's no defects in the plywood. There's no high-velocity blood spatter on the floor. What was pointed out to you is medium velocity, and that's from coming out of the wound and gravity bringing it down to the floor. You would see a pattern on the floor just like what you can see in the photographs at the top of that door. None of that's there. So I have to look at the science, and I have to look at inertia, and I have to look at that shot shell and how fast that shell is propelled out of that barrel, and I know that it can't turn around 180 degrees and go back the other direction. It's not like blood and tissue. We're talking about steel pellets.
Dr. Kinsey, are there studies on percentages of blowback when you're shooting into someone?
There are.
And based on your expert opinion, what percentage of blowback would come back at a shooter if they were able to shoot at that angle?
Well, I don't think there's any definite, but what I read is 8 to 10%, except in, like I said, it's not an absolute every time, but 8 to 10%. Remember, the most of your force is going out the front of the barrel.
And a moment ago, you were just talking about the defects and all of the trauma that would have happened to the paneling and the floor. Can you point on this photo with the dowel stick behind you for the jury? I just want them to see in this photo.
Right here. The void, as I documented in my original testimony, the void was from here down, other than one stray satellite drop of blood. That was fairly clean. From here to at least right here. But there's no defects here. There's no defects in that cement outside. There's no defects in the inside cement, and none in this OSB right here. And that was still there when I did the tour. They ripped out all the shelving and some of the insulation, but this was still there.
Dr. Kinsey, you may have covered this a little bit, but explain for the jury, if someone is shooting down, as we just demonstrated a moment ago here in the doorway, you're leaning out, the shooter is shooting down, how do pellets get embedded into the door frame up here? How is that possible?
I think it's impossible myself. Physics don't work that way unless you're shooting into a trampoline or a huge piece of steel, and then you may have a pellet deflected back on you. It happens many times, especially when we're shooting steel targets, but not at that velocity. It will not sink into the door frame, and it definitely will not dent that door with what I documented, in my opinion.
What is restate for this jury what the defense's theory based on that blowback that would have exploded into the shooter's face here behind Paul. Explain for this jury what the defense's theory is about how that shooter would have been injured.
The defense expert testified that that shooter would be most probably incapacitated from blood, bone, and body fluid, and there was a high likelihood that he was injured by those pellets.
Dr. Kinsey, in your expert opinion, is there anything awkward about a shooter standing outside going into an enclosed area to turn around to shoot someone from enclosed? Is there something weird about that to you?
I can't figure out the methodology of a shooter. I've never done any crime like that, Mr. Wilson, but I don't see, if we talk about common sense and everybody's mentioned the totality when they don't have an answer for something, it's always, I looked at the totality, but I don't see any reason for someone to squeeze up past one victim in this doorway to go inside to shoot him back out. And if he did, if that scenario did happen, that doesn't explain all the pellets that are in the floor of the feed room that we've heard testimony to as to why law enforcement didn't clean those pellets up. If it happened the way the defense expert says those pellets would be out here in the yard, they would not be inside that feed room.
Dr. Kinsey, you ever had a chance to review the case file on this particular case and observe the defense testimony from last week?
It's two separate things. Yes, sir. I have reviewed our case file. All crime scene or what I felt was crime scene related evidence. I didn't look into the videos and a lot of that other stuff. And I have witnessed the testimony of the defense experts.
Are you familiar with what the investigation has determined about the tool marks found on the 300 blackout shells found around Maggie's body and the tool marks found on the weathered 300 blackout shells found way up by the house in the flower bed? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar.
And what do you know about that?
The examination.
Beyond the scope of our case, it's going into completely new information. Their ballistic experts already testified. We didn't present a ballistic expert, and now they're parading him as a ballistic expert.
Response.
Your Honor, their expert said yesterday, about an hour and 9 minutes into their testimony, that it would be impractical for one shooter to bring in two long guns. It has always been the state's theory that the shooter owned both guns and had them on him. So we're rebutting what the defense expert said.
The objection overruled.
Please answer the question.
Can you ask
Dr.
me
Kinsey.
again, Mr. Wilson, please?
Are you familiar with what the investigation has determined about the 300 blackout shells found around Maggie's body and the 300 blackout shells found up by the flower bed that appeared to be several months old and weathered? What relationship do the shells have to each other?
According to the firearms examination, those cartridge casings were loaded and ejected from the same weapon.
So a family-owned weapon is what was used to kill Maggie.
Leading.
What do you infer from that information?
I would infer that this is a family-owned firearm.
There was some testimony yesterday, Dr. Kinsey, about, well, it was from the defendant's brother, Mr. John Marvin Murdaugh. And it related to the following day he came upon the crime scene. It had been cleared, and he saw how the crime scene was left. Can you explain? You've been in law enforcement for how many years?
30 years. Well, over 30, but 30 years getting paid.
And you're the chief deputy at a sheriff's department?
Yes, sir. Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office.
just to clarify some things, can you explain normally or traditionally how crime scenes are cleaned up for this jury? Is it the responsibility of law enforcement, in other words?
No, sir. There are private companies that are contracted through SOVA. Well, it used to be SOVA. The name's changed now, and I'm sorry.
What does SOVA stand for?
It's Victims...
State?
It's a State Office of Victims Assistance, but it's now changed. I can't tell you what the new acronym is, but it works through our victims advocates, law enforcement victims advocates. Almost every department has them, and there's funding provided from taxpayer funds to work through your victims advocates, and you go out and you clean these crime scenes for the families so they don't bear the burden of cleaning those crime scenes. Law enforcement in particular cannot collect and dispose of and transport sounds terrible, body parts or body fluids. That's something the coroner has to do because it's actually by permit through DHEC. But to make it easy on the family, these companies can collect those items and then they will turn them over with a chain of custody, or they will properly dispose of those items.
Dr. Kinsey, is it your expert opinion that a 6'4" shooter cannot be excluded from the murder of Maggie and Paul?
I see nothing that could exclude a 6'4" shooter.
In your expert opinion, can you tell this jury, is it right for the defense to say that there had to be two shooters based on the testimony you heard yesterday? In your expert opinion, can you exclude two shooters?
I cannot include or exclude two shooters.
Can the defense include, to the exclusion of all other possibilities, two shooters?
Absolutely not.
Beg your court's indulgence. Please answer any questions the defense has for you.
Mr.